All right. Well, thank you very much for being here. My name's Maria. I'm part of the Europe PMC team, and welcome to this Europe PMC programmatically webinar, specifically tailored for Europe PMC funders. Today's presenter will be Michael Parkin, our data scientist, and he'll walk us through three funder-specific use cases. Mike, if you could just move the screen to the next one. So today we'll cover a brief intro to Europe PMC content and APIs, and then delve directly into three case studies, as I mentioned, one on co-funding, one on preprinting habits, and one on monitoring data associated with the paper. We'll have Q&A session at the end, but if you have any pressing questions during the talk, please pop them in the chat and we'll get back to them just so you don't forget. I've shared the document ahead of time with you all that Mike will be using today, and that basically allows you to try out the code without needing to write a package in a specific language. But even if you don't have any programmatic experience, don't worry, we are going to be talking through sort of logic of getting the data and analyzing it more so than just specifically the way to do it. So hopefully everybody can get something out for today. I'm gonna go on mute now. This meeting is, sorry, just to mention, this meeting is recorded and we'll share recording and all of the materials again with all of you who registered and also through the funder forum. So if you after the webinar would like somebody else to get access to the same talk, then you can just forward them the recording link. Okay, with that, Mike, please take us away.
Yeah, thanks very much, Maria. Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for taking the time to join. As Maria said, I'll just start with a sort of 10-minute overview of what is an API, what's in Europe PMC, and then we picked out some case studies based on partly what we think showcases Europe PMC, but also requests from funders over the last few years for things that we've had on, oh, I need to do this through the API. How might I go about it? So hopefully some funders might recognize some of these sort of case studies. And at the end, we'll do Q&A. If I meant to say something that isn't clear, or you want a bit more clarity, please feel free to put something in the chat. And there are several colleagues of mine on the call today. They can reply to you in the chat. If not, I'll come back to it at the Q&A at the end. So just a bit of an introduction to what's actually in Europe PMC. We're going to be querying publication content for the most part over the next hour. So we need to know what publications are actually in Europe PMC to start with. For the most part, it's a huge volumes, close to 40 million PubMed abstracts. PubMed covers journals in the life sciences, but it's not every journal. It's the vast majority. But there are some journals that are not indexed in PubMed and therefore don't appear in Europe PMC. So there are some edge cases where you simply won't find a publication in Europe PMC because it's not in PubMed or any of the other sources. So it's worth bearing in mind. But the vast majority of life science content is available through Europe PMC. There's also approaching 1 million preprints from various life science and generalist preprint servers, and about 10 million full text journal articles. So that's quite a bit of overlap with the abstracts in PubMed. But again, important to note, not every article in Europe PMC is available in the full text. That's relevant if you wanted to, say, search for things like text mining that only happens on the full text. So lots of abstracts, and about a quarter of those are in full text as well. There's also several tens of thousands of full text preprints, both from a COVID project that we ran over the last few years. And we're also including Europe PMC funded preprints as full text as well. Also worth mentioning that Europe PMC is a lot about linking those journal publications and preprints to other sources of content. So if you're looking at things like reference lists of articles, citation counts for articles, we also have information about the authors and affiliations on those journal publications. Very pertinent for this call, funding information associated with publications. As you'll see, the first thing we'll be doing in these case studies is getting a list of publications funded by a particular funder, as well as data links to things like biological databases and such, or depositions of data in journal publications and where those might be. We'll see that in the third case study. Just a quick intro to why use these APIs? What are these things? They're application programming interfaces, and they're ways that software can communicate with other bits of software and services. Why not just use the EuropePMC website? We have a perfectly good website. You can export things into Excel. Why bother learning about what an API is and how you might make use of it? The main reason is scalability. You can start, when you're starting to do a bit of coding and using APIs, suddenly checking hundreds of thousands of publications becomes relatively trivial. No longer are you going to be like manually downloading Excel spreadsheets, spending hours of time looking at individual publications. You can do a huge volume in a relatively short amount of time. It's also quite accurate. Computers don't make mistakes. Assuming that you coded it correctly, there's no chance of copy pasting, accidentally shifting a cell in your Excel spreadsheet and all your formulae go horribly wrong. It's very difficult to make mistakes because the computers don't do that. I say, caveat being you have to have written the code accurately in the beginning. And it saves a lot of time. It's not quick to write code, particularly that interacts with APIs, but once it's written, it's very quick and it's easily extendable. If you just wanted to go, I just wish I'd got that little bit of extra information, it's trivial to go and change the code. It's not trivial to rerun your analysis all over again just to pick up that one thing that you didn't realize you needed. And you can do this again and again. You can run it every month, every day, every year, and the code broadly is going to stay the same. You don't need to have this huge exercise that you have to do annually with a lot of manual work. So hopefully that's why you might want to use them. I would go into a little bit about how you might do that. We have a page, it's called Developer Tools. You do not need to be a developer to look at that page on EuropePMC. It's on the top banner, Developers, and then Developer page. And here's the list of all the various APIs or downloads or forums, blogs. It's a useful page you might want to take a look at. Each of those links has documentation and information about what that service is, what you get out of it, and how you use it. But for the most part, just to broadly categorize, there's 4 in the top there that are about access to publication information. So you want to know, you've got some list of journal articles and you want to get information about them. The grants one is for grant information, not funding information associated with publications, but the information that your grants team provides Europe PMC about all of the research you funded. And then finally, the annotations API is about text mined entities that have been extracted from the full text, things like biological concepts or gene disease relationships that have been pulled out of usually the full text of the articles. The annotations API is where you go to look at that information. We'll do so in the final case study. So we just look at 2. We're not going to do anything with the grants API today. The first 2 case studies we use the articles one, and the last one uses the annotations API. If you go into that documentation, there's this thing. This is called a Swagger interface. It's basically a way for you to play around on the website without having to do any coding or any installation or anything like that. You can start looking at these parts of the APIs. You can put in some values and you can see what you get back. There's a sort of description of what it is you need to do on the right-hand side, and you sort of press run and it spits something out. So you can get a feel for what information do I need to put in what information does that API give me as a result. I'm going to specifically avoid really looking at what APIs look like over the next sort of 45 minutes, but it's important to show you just a quick example. The page you see here, this is the output of the article API. So I've put in some looks like I put in a publication ID, and this is what I get. This structure, this is called JSON. You might have heard of this. Basically, the things in blue are the kind of the name of the field, and the text in the kind of pinky purple is the result. So, for example, I can see a text in blue called title. Unsurprisingly, that's the title of the journal article. Stunning methods, blah, 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 blah. This is intended for computers to read, but it is human readable too. For example, you can probably infer that from the very last line here is open access N. You can probably infer as a human being that that means no, it's not open access. You can read this as a human being. I wouldn't sort of encourage you to do so. It's quite painful to look through thousands of these. Computer can read this in milliseconds, and this is why using APIs is very scalable, because a computer can read this with perfect accuracy in a fraction of a second and can then move on to the next several thousand that you might want to do. But we're not going to look at this again. You can look at this in the browser if you go to the link at the bottom when you have the slides later. It might not look exactly like this. The display depends a bit on your browser. But this is what an API response looks like. It's a lot of information about a publication. And we're going to make use of the fact that the EuropePMC APIs display all of this information, and we're going to gather particular bits in order to create some sort of plot or table, as we'll see in the next part. So I'll switch to a separate tab. Ask a question to colleagues. Is everything, do I need to zoom in, or is this okay?
Looks fine, Mike. If anybody
Okay.
can't see, please raise your hand and we'll try and adjust it.
Yeah. Yeah. You will have a copy of this, so you can read through this at your leisure. What you're looking at here is something called Google Colab. So if you've used sort of the Google suite of kind of office tools, you might know that Google Docs is a kind of collaborative version of Word where lots of people can contribute at the same time. This is kind of Google's answer for code. It lets you run code if you have a Google account. You can just read this if you don't. And lets multiple people contribute to the code, run it, see the results, and so on. It's quite a convenient way for me to share these case studies with you without having to require you to go and set up some software on your PC or laptop, which is often half the battle with these kind of things. So we're going to run this code line by line. I'm not going to go into the code. If you're familiar with this particular language, it's called R, capital R, then great. If you're not, please don't be put off by weird symbols, weird color coding. I won't go through the code. I'm just going to tell you what it's doing and explain the sort of methodology rather than give you a appreciation of R code. We don't need that today. Broadly speaking, each of these case studies is going to be 3 or 4 parts, or always the same kind of sequence. The first thing we're going to do is write a query to EuropePMC to give us a particular set of articles. And this is exactly the same as if you were running a search on the website, typing some text into the big search bar and pressing search. It's exactly the same with the API. The syntax we're going to use is the same. The results, the publication lists we're going to get are exactly the same. The next thing we're going to do is fetch some particular bit of information extra about those articles. And each of the case studies, it'll be a different bit of information we're interested in. We may need to do some tidying, count some numbers of things potentially. And then finally, we're going to plot them or display them in some way so we can actually take a look at these, because when you're doing things with hundreds of thousands of articles, you need some way of seeing this. The table's just too big to have any meaningful information about. We're not going to do hundreds of thousands of records because it would take a very long time. We're just going to be looking at a few hundred for each of these case studies, just in the interest of time. Okay, first thing we need to do is we're going to borrow some code that other people have written for us. It's the nice thing about R and another language called Python. A lot of the heavy lifting has been done by others. Both these languages have nice big communities where people share code. In particular, you'll see a line with the words Europe PMC in. There is a big set of code written in R that deals with the Europe PMC APIs, which saves me a lot of work writing anything where I have to actually go to the API. I just have a set of tools that are going to do a lot of that heavy work for me, which is really convenient. So I'm just going to run through these. This is just basically loading that code that other people have written into here so I can make use of it. The first case study is co-funding. So this is a scenario where you fund work that's resulted in journal articles, but often research isn't done in isolation. There's usually multiple teams, and those teams are usually funded by multiple sources. So this is a scenario where you as a funder want to know via journal publications which other funders tend to be on papers that we've funded. So first thing I'm going to do is I picked the funder I think that wrote into us about this, the NIHR. So the first line here, every time I click this play button, hopefully you can see this okay, I'm just going to run that, which means it's going to do the operation that I've asked it to do. In this case, it's going to set the funder name to the NIHR. And it's actually quite important that I write this exactly how it appears in the Europe PMC funder page. So it needs to be National Institute for Health Research brackets NIHR, and that will vary obviously funder to funder. But it's important that I get that right. The next thing I'm going to do is write a query in Europe PMC, and unsurprisingly, I'm going to want a query that's going to fetch me all of the journal publications that are associated with the NIHR. So I'm going to click play, and it's going to spit out. So this is the query I get. See this grant underscore agency bit. This is the Europe PMC syntax that says whatever I put after this is the funder's name. There's a link up at the top here, which is our help page about Europe PMC query syntax. We do need this. I'm then going to do this thing called EPMC search, Europe PMC search. This is going to take that query and it's going to get the first 200 publications. I'll just run that. And what it's going to get from the API is it's just going to get me the publication IDs. I'm not really interested in anything else. I just want to know basically PubMed IDs. What you see here is a table. It's not like nice and cell divided, but you've got rows and columns. This thing is a PMID, PubMed ID. Things might have PubMed Central IDs. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So I've got 200 publications funded by the NIHR. Next thing is this is called a function. This is just a bit of code which is going to take some kind of input. In this case, it's going to take publication IDs. It's going to do some stuff. In this case, what it's going to do is tell me who are all the funders associated with a particular publication, and it's going to give me as an output a list of funder names, in particular a list of unique funder names. Right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that list of 200 publications, use this function that is going to tell me who are the funders on it, and I'm going to run it. And I'm going to get a table of articles with funder names. And it'll take a little bit of time. I'm doing, how many are there? 200, probably take about 10, 15 seconds, something like that. If you're running a few hundred, yeah, you can wait patiently. If you're running a few thousand, maybe go and make a cup of coffee. If you're running hundreds of thousands to a million, probably is the kind of thing you want to leave running overnight. That'll take a fair amount of time. Okay, give it a few seconds. Okay, that's done. And just to show you what this now looks like. So we now have our table with publication IDs, and on the final column is the only thing we've added to this table is just this column called funders. We now have a bunch of funders associated with publications. And now we're going to plot those. So ignore this chunk. This is just preparing the data. I'm going to make this nice and big. So this is, if you haven't seen this before, this is a particular kind of plot. I'll spend some time explaining this because this looks a bit bewildering otherwise. Um, Down in the bottom left, you see a list of funder names. We've got Wellcome Trust, MRC, National Institute for Health and Care Research, which sounds awfully similar to National Institute for Health Research. This might be a case where the NIHR has changed its name, perhaps. British Heart Foundation versus Arthritis Cancer Research UK. These are the top 6 funder names that appeared in our 200 publications. And the bar chart, the horizontal bar chart on the left, is the frequency that they appeared. So Wellcome Trust was the most common co-funding funder in our 200 publications. Cancer Research UK was the 6th most common. This main part of this, see where all the dots and lines and another bar chart on the top, this is about co-funding where you have multiple funders that are co-funding. So the most common with 19 publications is to have just co-funding from the Wellcome Trust. But where you have 2 dots and a line connected with 4 here, this is where you have co-funding with the Wellcome Trust and the MRC. So that is the most common pairing of co-funding. And you can see this, you can extend this much further. It's very, very long. Towards the right-hand side of the chart here, we've got a couple of single publications with co-funding from 3 funders, Wellcome Trust, MRC, and CRUK, and another one, Wellcome Trust, MRC, British Heart Foundation. So I think this is quite a nice plotting way of seeing when you've got cases where you've got multiple funders all on the same paper. It can be quite informative to figure out who you're co-funding with when there's potentially half a dozen funders on a particular paper. To show you how you might do this if for a different funder. So I picked the NIHR here, but we could just as equally pick any other funder. I'm going to steal the FWF here. So I'm just going to change. This is all you need to do if you wanted to run this for yourself. I'm just going to change this to the FWF and do the same thing. So we're going to go through this. I'll just run these quickly. I'll just show you quickly where this is all coming from. So if I go to the About page for funders, and I go to the FWF, I'm looking at publications funded. So if I click on this, you can see this is the exact query that I'm running. And these results, these are the publications I'm looking at. So you could do the exact same thing through the website if you wished. This would take just much longer. So where are we at? Okay, so it's going to take another 30 seconds or so to get this. I'm just going to quickly open the chat in case anything. What happens when a funder has had a name change? Yeah, so what Europe PMC tries to do for Europe PMC funders is aggregate all of the funder names under a single entity. So Europe PMC can't control what publishers choose to use as a funder's name, but what we try and do is map them all to a single funder name. So when a funder's name changes or 2 funders merge or something happens, maybe, I don't know, in this case, maybe an extra name gets added in, we need to know from you as a funder that something has happened to the name and probably the logo has changed as well, and we'll want to update our pages for that. What we do is we map all the old names to the new one. So when you go to this page, we ideally want a single funder name that will generate all of the results, regardless of what the history of the funder's name was. We're trying to aggregate them all into one. So it's just let us know that your name has changed or the acronym has changed or you've merged, so we can map all of that data to whatever the latest funder's name is. Okay, so that should have run. So we're going to have a look at what the FWF's sort of funding plot looks like. Okay, so the most common co-funder is the ERC. And then we've got the DFG, Wellcome Trust, SNSF, the Vienna Science and Technology Fund, and so on. The most common pairings of co-funding are the French Research Agency, the DFG, and so on and so on. So hopefully you can see all you need to do is go and stick in your name at the top, run through, and you get a plot looking like this for your co-funding. You may want to do more than 200 results. In this case, it was just the latest 200 publications. You might want to do a few thousand and see. You might want to do everything you've published, but I expect that it might take a little bit of time to get through that. Okay, next one. So the next sort of case study is, so we've just looked at co-funding, so funding information. Now we're going to look at preprints. Europe PMC, as I mentioned before, has a very significant proportion. Yes, hopefully we'll hit 1 million probably early next year. Preprints in Europe PMC. Preprints are linked to journal publications when we can. We don't always have 100% accuracy because things like titles can change, authorship can change a little bit between the preprint and the journal article. But generally speaking, we can link preprints to journal publications. Preprints are becoming more of an issue in terms of funder policies and funder mandates. So you might want to know, for instance, in this particular case, which preprint servers researchers you fund are making use of. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to look at journal articles that have arisen from a preprint. So we're going to find, again, a list of, in this case, we're going to look for a list of journal publications that were funded by you and that also Europe PMC knows originated from a preprint. And then we're going to go back and look at where did that preprint get published, which preprint server did that preprint get published in, and then we're going to count them up and make a nice bar chart. So we'll use the FWF again. This time the query is ever so slightly different. Hopefully you can see this okay. The first bit's exactly the same. Grant agency FWF. So publications where Europe PMC knows it was funded by the FWF. And then there's a little bit here that says, and has preprint Y. That means, and Europe PMC knows that that publication is linked to a preprint. So it's just that little bit extra that's appeared in this search query. So step one done. We've written a query for Europe PMC using the query syntax that's going to get us a list of publications. Now we'll fetch those publications. In fact, this time we'll just fetch the first 100 of them. There were just over 1,000 that Europe PMC knew about. Again, another function. Again, just a function is we give it some information, it does some stuff, and it spits something out at the end. In this case, it's going to take our publications, it's going to check the Europe PMC API to figure out what preprint was it arose from, and then it's going to look at the preprint to say which server is the preprint published in. That's what this slightly concerning mess of stuff looks like. It's going to take in a publication and it's going to spit out a preprint server name. So we'll run that, and then we'll just run this on the 100 journal publications. Sorry, this thing spits out a lot of one record found returning one. That's a little bit annoying, but we'll ignore that. Take a few seconds to run. I'll just scroll past it all. What I'll show you here is kind of what the data actually looks like. It's going to be a table with a list of publication IDs, usually PubMed IDs. And then next to it is going to be a new column, which tells me which server the associated preprint was published in. There we go. So, for example, PubMed ID 393 has a preprint that was published in bioRxiv. You see various preprint server names. This goes on for another 90 rows, and you could do all of those, something like 1,100 if you liked. I'll just plot this as a very boring looking gray bar graph, but I haven't done any work to make this look pretty, I'm afraid. Apologies. So bioRxiv is the most prevalent preprint server that FWF funded researchers are publishing in, at least based on the top 100 results, followed by Research Square, and then sort of looks like a tie between scIRxiv and preprints.org. scIRxiv is a preprint server in psychological sciences. Preprints.org is generalist. And Authoria is another generalist preprint server. So from what I'd say, I'd actually suggest the scIRxiv value is reasonably high, but bioRxiv is kind of the dominant preprint server in the life sciences. That's not terribly surprising. It might be interesting to run this on all of those 1,000 and see if this holds true. But it looks like SciArchive is reasonably high considering it's a very specialized preprint server. So presumably the FWF maybe funds quite a lot of research in psychology. We might infer that from those results. The last one, we're going to look at using another API from EuropePMC, which is the annotations API. So again, just to clarify that annotations are cases where EuropePMC's run its abstracts and all its full text through what we call the text mining pipeline, which is where terms, relationships between things, accession numbers, things like clinical trial numbers are extracted from the text. And we call that an annotation. And so you can build up a picture of where the data in a paper has come from, or perhaps where the data has been deposited to, by looking at these terms, accessions that the researcher has written in their article. So you may wish to know, for example, as the MRC, which biological databases are our researchers depositing data in. That might be a question you want to ask. The annotations API is a good tool to use to try and answer that question. So we'll set the funder name here as the MRC. And we're going to go back to that tried and tested query, which is just grant agency medical research council. So we don't need the and preprint bit. We're not interested in preprints anymore. We just want a list of MRC publications. We're going to limit to 300, so we can get some decent results, but this doesn't take too long. The MRC has close to 200,000 articles in EuropePMC. It'll take a very long time to check this on all of them. Here's our function again. Again, this is going to take in publication IDs. It's going to check the annotations API to find out which data resources are quoted, or which annotations have been pulled out of these articles. And it's going to return back a list of what the entity accession was, and more importantly, what database that is hosted in. This will take a little bit of time again, maybe 10-15 seconds or so. Again, sorry, this thing spits out some pretty useless information. We're just going to ignore that warning message about no encoding supplied. It doesn't matter. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it to not do that. Anyway, let me scroll down a little bit. Again, I'm going to end up with a table, and it's going to be a list of those publications that we had before, along with a set of life science databases and either accession IDs or clinical trial numbers or protein data bank IDs, things like this. And then we're going to plot that again, and we're going to get actually a lot of bars this time because there's a lot of life science databases out there where people are putting data or reusing the data. And then we're going to see which are the most common. And I'm not going to know every single database name. If you're interested in what they are, hopefully you either already know or one of my colleagues can say if I don't know which one it is. So here we go. Here's our table. So like before, everything up to the fourth column is just our publication IDs that we fetched. I think there were 300 or something like that. Not every publication will have any information for us. In particular, if all we had in EuropePMC was the abstract, people don't tend to quote databases in the abstract of an article. So sometimes a publication might not have any annotations that we've been able to pull out. This looks like we've got 52 rows. I think we started with 300 publications, so quite a few did not have anything, and some will have multiple. So here we go. For example, this article has a DOI, which is some sort of probably Zenodo link or something like that. That appeared in the data availability section. Sorry, it's a bit chopped off here, but when we have full text, we keep track of which section of the article in this case, a DOI appeared in. And then the subtype tells us kind of what type of thing that is. So ENA is the, hopefully I get all these right, European Nucleotide Agency, maybe. RefSNP is something to do with single nucleotide polymorphisms. NCT is, I think, clinical trials. GEO, I have no idea, I'm afraid. In any case, we'll plot this, and there's going to be quite a few bars, I suspect. Here we go. So here we're just counting up mentions of database uses, essentially. The most popular one here looks to be this single nucleotide polymorphism. Perhaps papers tend to quote lots of those in one go. Clinical trials reasonably high, so maybe not surprising for the Medical Research Council that clinical trials are mentioned a lot. PDBE, that's the Protein Data Bank in Europe, so lots of work here on protein structure. DOIs, so yeah, lots of data DOI mentions. UniProt, ENA. Yeah, I won't go through all of these. So again, you can do the same thing. We can just go and switch the funder's name. Maybe I'll let's see. Let's do, just to show. Let's do Wellcome Trust. If I can spell properly. So you see, it's just a case of change the funder name, press the play button. You have to go through all of these. There's a way of running multiple in one go, but I'm just going to run them one by one. I'm going to get 300 Wellcome publications. Wellcome has a fairly similar number of publications to the MRC, actually. Run these. We're going to run, and it's presumably going to be a different set of 300. And then we could see how does the MRC's distribution compare to Wellcome's. Probably it's broadly similar, but let's wait and see. I'm just going to check the chat if there's any questions. Looks like there isn't. Okay, good. Yeah, just to say, I think you can view this page. You don't need any kind of account or anything like that. But Google's actually doing the data processing here. So Google's actually going to the Europe PMC API and fetching information kind of on my behalf. So Google does require that you have an account with them to actually do that running part, which is kind of annoying, but fair enough, I guess. At the EBI here, we all have Google accounts associated with our work email addresses. So this is easy, but you can use a personal email address. There's nothing private or anything about this, so feel free. But annoyingly, yeah, if you do want to run the code, Google does require that you have an account with them. That looks like it should be done. Yeah. So we're going to get, again, a different table here with some probably different articles and different database mentions. I'll give it a plot. Hopefully you can see how easy this was to just rerun. Once the code is written, it's trivial to just change the values. Okay, this looks really different. Sorry, let me make this bigger. So for Wellcome, the ENA is by a mile the most common database mention, followed by RFAM. I do not know what that is. Maybe a colleague can put that in the chat or something. But then followed by the Protein Data Bank, and everything else is at a much lower level. So really dominated by the ENA. Could just be that those top publications happen to be papers on nucleotides, but in any case, yeah, quite a different profile to the MRC.
I'll hand over to Lou.
But hello, thank you very much for this training. I wanted to ask, so I'm relatively new to using EPMC, and I've used a couple of the API tools on the developers tab on EPMC, kind of going down using the like changing the parameters and things like that. Is what you've shown us today with the kind of writing the code, is that just another way of using the tools that are available to us on the developers tab, or is it kind of a way that you can do it in a more detailed way? Kind of what's the benefit of going through and writing out the code as opposed to going through the APIs on the developers tab? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Cool.
In one part, it lets you save the results very easily. So those tables that I was generating as part of the process, I can very happily export those as say an Excel spreadsheet if I wish to.
Yeah.
Quite painful to do that. I mean, I don't know a very convenient way of doing that through the kind of the developer tools page. You can have a look at the output, but if you actually want to save your results, having the code is very useful. You can then go, and you don't need to plot it using, you know, the way I've shown. You can sort of get to that point, save it as a big spreadsheet, and then, you know, go and use Excel to make your charts or something like that. But yeah, I'd say the ability to save the data and the reproducibility. If you want to do it again, you don't need to remember all the parameters you put in. You've already saved them in your code. You will have specified those things. You will have written your query. You don't need to remember, how did I do that last time? You've kind of got it saved and ready to go. Without you need to read the developer page to figure out what goes in, what comes out. But writing the code means you've done that. You don't need to remember how to do it again next time. And when you want to do thousands and thousands of results, it's a lot easier having that code to just go play, 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 and then make your spreadsheet, rather than going through the website and, I don't know, copying and pasting a lot of information. It'd be quite a painful thing to do. The good news about that Europe PMC library package I mentioned earlier is the person who wrote that has read all the documentation for us. You know, it kind of saves us that job. And they've written their own documentation about how you use their tool, which is more straightforward as a non-developer to use than what is quite lengthy documentation as it needs to be for developers on the Europe PMC website.
Right.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. I think I missed something earlier about that library, because then I was looking at, well, how do I put together my code? Am I using the query syntax thing? But maybe I've missed something.
Sorry, yeah, it was at the top. Yeah, there's the top of the document, which has all the code in, has some links to various bits of that and a bit of an explanation about that library and such.
That's great. Thank you so much. I
No
appreciate
problem.
it.
I also want to add that in my experience, and I'm not someone who uses programmatic access, but who does occasionally kind of take advantage of the Swagger interface to do some queries that are just not possible on the website. I mean, another benefit of doing things in this way is that you can hook up to different APIs, like Mike done in the last example, because that's not really something that, again, you can easily do by just sort of plugging different queries. It really helps to be able to link, I don't know, grant information to publications, to annotations, and then just make your kind of way through it. And you can also join it with APIs from other services. Like if, for example, you figured out which of your publications go into bioRxiv, but then wanted to see what sort of bioRxiv sub topic they belong to. That's not something that in Europe PMC we store as information about preprints. So you might want to then go and look at, you know, where your preprints on bioRxiv sit within their topic division. I also thought it might be helpful, Mike, I don't know if you want to say a couple of words on this, but obviously we hold funding information for many different funders. It's not just Europe PMC funders, and that information comes from various sources. But specifically for Europe PMC funders, we do that data tidying up. And we do show on the funder KPI dashboards, I believe, where the funding sources are coming in and how we sort of merge that. So I don't know, Mike, if that would be something helpful to highlight.
But yeah, as Maria says, funding information attached to publications comes from a lot of different places. It comes to us from PubMed, it comes to us from Crossref. For the most part, it's via the publisher in one way or another. And yeah, unfortunately, funding information can be captured to varying degrees of accuracy during journal submission. And so Europe PMC often ends up with many name variations for a funder, with acronyms or which country it's in, or multiple languages, especially for funders like the FWF or the SNSF in particular. So yeah, we try and map them all to a single funder name. That's the one that we refer to you as in Europe PMC. Yeah, there's different profiles for different funders. We also text mine funding information. So it comes to Europe PMC from a lot of different ways. I think I'll have to share that link later, Marianne. I don't have easy access to that. Yeah.
We can, I can send it in the follow-up email if you want to look at where the grant funding details coming from specifically for your organization. But it's just to highlight that, I mean, this code is sort of universal. You could run it for a non-Europe PMC funder as well. It's just that the data won't be as clean to start with, and you'll probably need to do a similar effort to what we do to clean the data up. Before we finish, Nancy raised her hand. Nancy, you're muted, or at least we can't. No, I think we just can't hear you.
Hello, can you
Yeah.
hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. I just have one quick question. Is there any limit on number of records we can fetch in a request?
No, there isn't. That Europe PMC library that I've used has a kind of built-in. There is a limit on how many requests you can make per second.
Okay.
But that library I used will take that into account. But no, there's no limit. Feel free. It's really just time. If you want to check, your entire portfolio of publications, say if you're the MRC and you've got 200,000, it just takes a while to run through all of that. There may be, depending on what kind of information you're looking for, there may be bulk download options on that developer page that's more useful to you. So you can just download everything and then deal with it offline. It depends what you're looking for, but no, you're welcome to gather as much as you like. There's no limit on the volume.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming today. It was really great to see so many faces, and hopefully we'll get to see you at our next webinar. Take care and have a lovely day.